All right, Roger, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited about our conversation. We've been able to touch offline, and also I was fortunate enough to receive your book. So thank you for sharing that. I had the opportunity to go through it very quickly, but I'll definitely be looking at it in detail. And what the one thing that jumped out to me is you're bringing an issue to the forefront, or many issues, but there's a lot of humor behind it. And what I appreciate there is we could still find light in any situation. And I think people tend to take it seriously. And one of the themes that you do touch on in your book also is this polarization we're experiencing in the world today, where people are talking over each other, not seeing eye to eye, while we can have different perspectives and still find commonality within that. So I appreciate the humor there because I think people take themselves too seriously and their views.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And I know your book, Erasing America, as the title suggests, is based on the US. But as I mentioned to you, a lot of the things that you're highlighting, I can see in my country, in Canada, and perhaps to a larger extent within the Western world, which I think is important to touch on. And some of the examples that you may be citing today or you've cited in your book are specific to the US. But I think, as I mentioned, you can expand those across the Western horizon there. And we're obviously seeing these issues at the forefront. But before we jump into it, I do want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to the listeners. Let us know a little bit about yourself and also touching on why you may be an expert in assessing the financial situation as we have come to understand in the US.
Well, my two passions outside of my family, Farkan, is politics and finance. So I'm the son of an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in Midtown Manhattan, of all places. My dad ran a laundry near Times Square, just to give you a focus of where it was. And my mom passed away when I was 12, and I did have some behavior issues, I guess you could say. So
Mm-hmm.
my dad liked me to work at the store more to keep an eye on me than to increase his productivity.
Yeah.
Okay. That worked well. But what that gave me was a sense of a work ethic. And I am forever grateful to my dad. May he rest in peace. My work ethic was born on 45th Street at Norton's Laundry and Dry Cleaning Company. I went to State University of New York up near Buffalo, not far from the Canadian border. Um, my major mistake there was that I majored in political science, which in retrospect was one of the poorest decisions I ever made. But for the last 40 years, I've been a financial professional. I was a senior vice president at Morgan Stanley Wealth Management. I was also a senior investment management consultant at Smith Barney, two names that you probably are familiar with. And over a period of time, I got a sense that our political direction was swaying the wrong way. And this really came to a head during COVID when I moved from Maryland to Florida. And I saw bills coming out of the Senate and the House that made no sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
I saw I saw Biden vetoing bills because there were not bathrooms for three different sexes instead of two. DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, became more important than anything else. And socialist policies, which I know you've seen in Canada,
Mm-hmm.
went to the forefront. And these really bothered me to the point where I started writing about it every week and sharing an email with friends, family, and colleagues. And at first, it was maybe one page a week of my rants and what I saw in the media.
Mm-hmm.
And after a while, it became 1,500 to 2,000 words a week. And just yesterday, I finished penning my 82nd weekly update. And the first 48 became this book that you
Mm-hmm.
have, Erasing America, Broken Country, Broken Politics. And you'll notice there are no
Mm-hmm.
chapters, they're all
Mm-hmm.
memos. Okay. That's what they
Yeah.
were. So that's where I come from.
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate you sharing all of that. And I like the layout of the book too, because as you alluded to, there are memos. So it's not, at least what I was able to gather from it is you're sharing an opinion and an observation around what you're seeing, right? It's not meant to suggest that you're right and everyone else is wrong. And I think you touch on it in your book too, that we can have multiple perspectives, and that's okay too. I think the problem here is
Exactly.
that polarization that we've touched on already that's creating an issue. Maybe we could start there, right? And one of the things you touch on in your book is the media's role in this polarization. And I think, at least for me, this came to the forefront during the pandemic where people just started to have different views and different opinions, and that created quite the divisiveness within families too. Forget outside of
Yes.
families, but within families, and I started seeing that, and it was fairly shocking to me. But from your perspective, where do you think the media's role has come in this, and why has it been so impactful?
Well, I have seen the media is mostly liberal Democrats in their
Hmm.
newsrooms. And there have been a number of studies that showed literally 80 to 90% of the employees were Democrats. There were very few conservatives. And what I have found is that they conveniently omit certain
Hmm.
facts that do not play to their scenarios. And when the facts are not in their corner, they, along with many politicians, attack people personally instead of debating, the facts. And I'm sure that even in Canada, you've heard of Ben
Yes.
Shapiro. He's a leading conservative. He's one of the smartest fellows I've ever heard. I've watched a lot of his videos. I've read every single one of his books. He might be a Harvard educated lawyer, but he's okay in my
Yeah.
book. Even though he went to Harvard and he's a lawyer, he's still okay. I won't hold that against him. But the interesting thing is, he talks at universities, and I see these college kids, when he debates them fact for fact, they don't have the facts to
Hmm.
back up their assertions, and they begin to attack him and his
Hmm.
wife
Hmm.
personally. They say he is not well endowed. They say his wife is a whore. They do all these personal attacks instead of meeting him head on, fact for fact. And I see that so prevalent in the media
Mm.
now.
Yeah, and I think to a larger extent, I've observed that in society in general, where if you are able to present facts and prove someone wrong, they'll find another way to attack you, whether it's a personal attack.
Yeah, they attack you
Yeah,
personally.
it may be a
Yes,
personal attack, or they may just say, oh, you're being aggressive or you're being condescending or whatever it is, just to get out of the argument and deflect, right?
exactly.
And that's, unfortunately, that's being rewarded in society today. If you can then become the
Yes.
victim to get your way out. What are your thoughts around that? This whole victim mentality that we've created?
No, you're right. There is a victim mentality and there is an
Mm,
entitlement mentality. And I often refer to, there are three letters in the English language that by themselves are rather fine and
mm-hmm,
meaningless. But when you put them together, I have a real problem with them. The letters are, and you might even know, A, O, and C. So that's the name for a congresswoman who's a newer congresswoman. She's very young. She represents the Bronx and the Queens in New York City, which is one of the reasons why I will never go back to where I was
mm,
born. Um, she was a bartender, and she is now the most liberal, progressive, socialist Democrat. In 2019, she put forth a bill, House Bill number 5071. And that bill basically said, if you can manage to sneak into the border, you now qualify for a free college education, free medical, free dental, free housing, universal basic income, and a cell phone.
Mm.
Oh, and you could vote. She's out of her
Yeah.
mind. Okay. I could see 1 billion people coming across the southern
Hmm.
border. Now it's been, I think I've seen numbers as high as 18
Mm.
million. And what they're trying to do is create a permanent Democratic majority, one party rule, and turn the United States into a
Hmm.
socialist nanny state where the state takes care of all of your needs. There are no entrepreneurs. There's a very small amount, usually five big companies in each industry that the government can command and
Hmm.
monitor and
Yeah.
control. So they're trying to totally change this country, and victimhood and entitlement are right
Yeah.
at the pinnacle of all of
Yes,
this.
yes. And to tie it back, I think we're seeing similar issues in Canada as well. And there's a lot of population growth happening. There's a housing crisis. People can't afford their homes. Inflation isn't helping. So at some point, something's got to give. And I do want to come back to the financial aspect of it. But just to touch on the entitlement, and you touched on your own experience as a child working for your father and learning that work ethic very early in life. And I've mentioned to you, my parents immigrated, so I saw their work ethic, and that taught me something.
You saw how hard
Yeah,
they worked.
absolutely.
Yes.
And I think there's something to be said about that work ethic where I've come to understand, and I consider myself really, I'm grateful for it and super fortunate to have that early in life because I knew very early in life that anything I wanted to achieve in life, I'd have to work for it. And there was never in the back of my mind any excuse when I did fall short. Because for me, when I did fall short, is to look at, okay, well, how can I do better? And not to blame the circumstances around me. Whereas I think that's missing in the world today. And
Yeah.
that sense of entitlement that you've touched on, and I even look at it with my own child, right? He's never going to know the hardships because everything's provided for him. And it's one of the things I fear for him is he may not have the same level of resilience when he goes out into the world and has to face failure. And this,
I feel the same with my
yeah,
family. Yeah.
but I see this as a therapist too when I'm working with clients and they're of a specific generation. That resilience takes longer and it's harder for them to find it within themselves. Do you feel like this whole entitlement, from your perspective, is that led to our future generations missing this piece of resilience that perhaps some of us had, or even your generation had?
Let me tell you, I am worried about our future generation. Um, I've seen people that are severely underemployed, living in their parents'
Hmm.
basement, playing the video games, not interested in a full time
Hmm.
job, not interested in accomplishment. Goal setting means nothing. Remember when I was 13, I was working at my dad's store. And I remember in Manhattan, I saw all these kids driving 10-speed bicycles, the ones with the
Yeah.
curved handlebars. Boy, did I want
Hmm.
one. And I asked my dad for one. And he said, absolutely not. If you want it, you'll
Hmm.
earn it. Okay. So I went to Norton's Laundry every day after school, and I was earning $1.50 an
Hmm.
hour.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what my dad paid. And after months and months, I was able to afford I think it was about
Hmm.
$118, which at the time was like a
Hmm.
thousand. And I bought my 10-speed bike, and I was so proud that I had earned it. I took care of it, and I had pride in it. I don't see any pride
Hmm.
when I look around me anymore to the younger generation. I don't see a success orientation. And it might be something that you want to spread around. So I've written 7
Hmm.
books. This book that I wrote called 18 Wealth Lessons: Why Prosperity Seldom Taps You on the Shoulder After Years of Anti-Wealth Programming. I think this book provides a number of therapeutic lessons to get people on the right
Mm-hmm.
path for success orientation. And it doesn't matter if you're in the US, France, or
Mm-hmm.
Canada. Okay. Success is success. Are you going to pull yourself up by your bootstraps? Are you going to be responsible? Are you going to be persistent? And the two biggest things that I see missing is number one, behavior, the correct behavior, and number two, the correct
Mm-hmm.
decisions. Because you know that if you make the correct decisions and you employ good behavior, you will reach your goals as long as you're persistent.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I think that persistency is what's missing, as well as the consistent drive to keep going at it. I think, yeah,
Drive, yes.
unfortunately, because of this sense of entitlement, if we don't achieve what we set out for immediately, then the default is to give up. And
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They give up too
mhm.
soon.
Or they look at circumstances outside of themselves and say this happened, that happened, and this person did this, or this person was not
Yeah.
supporting whatever.
And if they get a no, they don't comprehend the fact that no might mean not
Mm-hmm.
yet. Okay. Just, I heard a long time ago a wonderful line: God's delays are not God's denials.
Mm-hmm.
So you might not be successful this year. What's your
Mm-hmm.
rush?
Yeah, yeah, or just maybe you need to work harder. You wouldn't work hard enough.
Exactly. Or think better, gain more information. I remember I used to be severely in
Mm-hmm.
debt. I think you'll enjoy this. I had four credit cards. I had a MasterCard and Visa from one bank and MasterCard and Visa from another bank. And do you know how much my credit limit was on each card? I'm going to say the banks really didn't
Yeah.
trust me as far as they could throw me. But I managed to get myself deeply in debt,
Mm-hmm.
$2,800 worth. And I got a cash advance on one card to pay the monthly bill on the other card until that didn't
Mm-hmm.
work. But what turned me around was I started reading books on finance and success. And I read over 100 of
Mm-hmm.
them. And I distilled them into a list of 25. And I'll send them to you if
Yeah.
you wish. You could spread it around with your viewers and
Mm-hmm.
audience. But my sense is that these 25 books will give you a PhD in
Mm-hmm.
success, not a bachelor's, not a master's, a
Yeah.
PhD. And it'll teach you much more than you'll ever learn in college if you're willing to put in the
Mm-hmm.
work. Okay.
Yeah. When ultimately it's about putting in the work, and that's
Yeah. And there's no exams. And it's free except for the cost of the book. Hell, you could buy them used on
yeah.
Amazon. The 25 books will cost you what, $400. That's
Yeah,
about it.
absolutely.
You know.
Yeah, the information's out there if you truly go seek it, right? And
Yes.
absolutely. So, probably a
So
good segue as you touched on the finance side. And one of the things you've touched on in your current book that we're talking about is the financial spending that the government is employing. And I've seen that in Canada too, where taxpayers are just getting hemorrhaged, right? And inflation is up, cost of living is up. And I alluded to the housing crisis earlier. What's going to give here? And one of the predictions you've made is bankruptcy in general for the country. So, what's going on from your perspective, and why is this? And I think one of the metaphors you use is a drunken teenager who's got his mom's credit card, right? So,
for the Biden administration, we're now up to 35 trillion and change in federal debt
mm-hmm,
directly. And my sense is that my great grandkids, if my kids ever get
mm-hmm,
married and have kids, they're going to be paying it
mm-hmm,
back because it's such a sum that boggles the
mm-hmm,
mind. And the government keeps borrowing
mm-hmm,
money. And the interest on the debt is now eclipsing the amount, the percentage of the defense
Mhm.
budget, which is the single largest item in the
Mhm.
federal budget. Bankrupting the country, that's when the country implodes. And I hope I'm not alive to see it. I hope my kids aren't alive to see it. Something's got to give. And if we keep electing representatives and senators and presidents that have the same mindset as the people currently in power, then this country is in deep
Mhm.
trouble and it's going to lead to more
Mhm.
distress. And all the problems that you've seen, that's just the
Mhm.
beginning, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're talking about some of the spending, and this may be a bit controversial, but defense spending, right? So there's a lot of funding towards wars. What are your thoughts around that, considering the debt, right? And again, same thing in Canada, but you've got all this debt, yet you're funding other countries and supporting the wars that are happening.
I look at it this way: the world is a very dangerous
Hmm.
place. China, Venezuela, there are any number of places that A, don't like you, and B, don't like
Hmm.
me, and are jealous of our way of life, think we are
Yeah.
heathens, and that we don't have a right to exist. Pardon me, but the Declaration of Independence says I have a right to
Hmm.
exist. And it was signed by 56 of the most gifted gentlemen this country ever produced back in the 1700s. And my sense is that something that Ronald Reagan said, peace through strength.
Hmm.
Okay. And my sense is that unfortunately, you have to be armed to the teeth, be willing to use it, but prefer not
Hmm.
to. Okay. So that when your enemy looks across the line and sees what you're capable of doing, they turn around and say, not
Hmm.
today. So if the leaders of these bad actor countries can every day turn around and say, not today, then I think it's justified. I don't like
Hmm.
it, but it's
Hmm.
justified.
Yeah.
What do you
I
think?
think that some of the stuff I've read, it's, I can agree with you to a certain extent. However, I feel like now with some of the advanced, especially if you talk about nuclear energy and all that focus on just nuclear, they're also spending money, right? So if you see across the line, to your point, that the opposing party, for example, is amping up, then I need to do that too. So then it's an arms race. And
No, you're exactly right. What if, choose whatever bad
yeah.
actor country you want, what if they make an army of
Hmm.
drones and those drones can drop poison gas, bombs? I don't think they're going to drop
Hmm.
leaflets, okay? But my sense is that if they do that and you have no defense against it, what does that say about you?
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't know
Yeah.
the answer. I'm not
Yeah.
smart enough,
Yeah.
okay? But I know that you're going to be at a severe disadvantage when those drones start coming across your
Hmm.
border in mass. What are you going
Yeah.
to do?
Yeah.
You need a defense.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, and
I guess it's anti-drone technology.
no, I hear you. And to your point, I don't know what the right answer is. I've looked at it
Neither
both
do I.
sides, but I think there has been a lot of controversy surrounding some of the spends, right? Considering the debt. So that was definitely one thing I wanted to touch on. And I guess what
Yeah.
I'm hearing from you, your view is at some point you have to spend that money just to instill fear.
If you can give me a cogent alternative, I'm
Hmm.
all ears.
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I don't know what that
Right.
alternative is.
Right. But what about when it comes to funding other countries? Because that's been a huge sore spot too for taxpayers.
I have a
Yeah.
problem with that. I know that there have been so many articles in the American and Canadian media about the funding of Ukraine, for
Hmm.
example, and so much of the
Hmm.
fraud that's gone on in Ukraine, and that Ukraine is part of
Hmm.
Europe, and that if it's important to the Europeans that the Russians don't take over Ukraine, then the
Hmm.
Europeans should be putting in the money as opposed to Canada or Australia or the United
Hmm.
States, for
Hmm.
example. Okay. And I see the point. I
Hmm.
really do. And I know that Russia, Putin, is nobody's
Hmm.
friend. Do I want to see his sphere of influence grow?
Hmm.
No. Okay. But I think that arming them to the teeth might be the lesser of two
Hmm.
evils. I don't
Hmm.
know. I'm not smart enough to give you a
Yeah.
good answer.
Yeah. Well, and touching on Europe and some of the trends you're seeing in the United States and similarly in Canada, I remember 10 years ago, a lot of the countries were defaulting and basically the EU had to bail them out. What were your thoughts when that was happening? And do you see something similar then following suit in Canada or the US?
I remember years ago when you were a kid,
Hmm.
Argentina was defaulting, Greece was defaulting, and a couple of
Hmm.
others. And I know that over time, they righted their
Hmm.
ship. And the bankers always redo the loans. But the point is that I remember Trump got on the bandwagon back in 2017, 18, and 19 that the European NATO partners were not paying their mandated share of
Hmm.
defense. I think they had to put in maybe 1% or 2% of their GDP, and they were woefully underneath that. And the biggest boost to NATO was the US. And Trump said, not anymore. You guys, ladies, you have to come up to where you said you would come up because we're not going to make up the difference anymore. And now Europe is arming itself to the teeth. They are increasing their contributions to NATO. They're doing what they promised
Hmm.
to do, but did not do for many
Hmm.
years. So I think that at least it's turning the corner and they are meeting their obligations. And I would hope that through meeting their obligations, that they keep Europe safe and
Hmm.
secure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And I hold my
Yeah,
fingers.
fair enough. And you talked about the whole idea of the elected officials. And another thing that you mentioned in your book is that they do work for us. And one of the things I'm seeing is there's this, they're not willing to be held accountable, nor are they willing to answer some of the tough questions. They tend to often, I find, deflect, as we've touched on, which has become the norm. They'll deflect or find excuses or maybe to a certain extent, this could be, I guess, a conspiracy, but a lot of the times new issues somehow arise that take up people's attention, and then you forget about the. I know there's been a lot of issues within Canada and scandals, even with our leadership, and then a new issue arises, and then people forget about the scandal that we focused on.
Yeah, it tends to take center
Yeah.
stage. I don't know if you have this issue going on in Canada, but I'll briefly
Hmm.
describe it. So, President Biden, one of his promises was that he would forgive student
Hmm.
loans. So let me get this right. I want to go to college. I take out a student loan. I sign all the papers. I say, yes, I will pay back the principal and the
Hmm.
interest. And then it gets wiped off by the president by executive order. The House of Representatives has said no. The United States Senate has said no. The Supreme Court has said no. And the Biden administration continues to let people out of their student loans in defiance of the two other branches of Congress. This is all over the
Hmm.
papers now here. I don't know if you have anything similar going on over there.
Not to the same extent, but there's different issues. Very similar, but yeah, different issues that are coming to the forefront. And I guess my question is really around why, like, why are these leaders not taking accountability? right? Because ultimately they work for the taxpayers. So, and that's something you touch on, right, in your book. So, what's going on in that front? And maybe it's just
They seem to have their own
Mhm,
agenda. And my sense is that Biden, in particular, his strings are being pulled by
mhm,
others. He doesn't have the mental acuity to do anything that he's doing.
mhm,
Somebody else is clearly pulling the strings. And I've seen article after article that it's actually Barack
mhm,
Obama. I don't know if that's
mhm,
true. Might be, but I don't know if it's true. But all these progressive liberals that inhabit the White House, they're the ones making the decisions. He's in bed by 4 o'clock. Okay. And he's not taking responsibility for
mhm,
anything. And the progressive liberals have their platform, and this is what they want to achieve. And they're going to go hell or high water while they're in power to get it done. And they're not going to apologize to
mhm,
anyone.
mhm. Yeah, and that's a very specific example, but I think this has been a general issue with the elected officials. So, from your perspective, what can the general population do?
They could vote their asses out of office. That's
Yeah.
the only thing I know how to
Hmm.
do peacefully and
Hmm.
legally. Vote their asses out of
Hmm.
office.
Hmm. So, what I'm hearing from you is we do have a voice, we do have options and choices, and we just need to be aware of that and perhaps do a better job of educating ourselves too, right? And that's what's
And
missing.
that's one of the reasons, for Ken, that I wrote the book was to get people off of the
Hmm.
couches and get them involved and banish forever the phrase, my vote won't count. I'm only one
Hmm.
person. Okay. I recently had a discussion with a senior citizen, and somehow, go figure, it turned to
Hmm.
politics. And he said, I wouldn't vote for either of them, making reference to Biden or Trump. And I said, okay. And he says, in fact, I've never voted at
Hmm.
all. I want you to know time
Hmm.
stopped. In my head, I was screaming. I didn't say a word. I smiled. I went on to the next subject, but I wanted to kick this fellow's ass out in the street and yell and scream at
Hmm.
him because I couldn't understand how anyone would abdicate their right for 80 years not to
Hmm.
vote. To me, it's despicable behavior. And I wrote the book in part to get people off their couch, get them involved. For example, I moved to Florida a couple of years ago.
Hmm.
I joined several of the local Republican parties. I joined the Sons of the American Legion. I did not serve in the military, but my dad served in World War II. So I joined the Sons of the Legion. I'm involved. I participate. I give money and I support local candidates who are conservative. I get off the couch and I get off my ass. I get
Hmm.
involved. And that's what I ask other people to do. You can't rely on everyone else to do it while you're at home watching reruns of
Hmm.
NCIS. We all like Jethro Gibbs. I get it. He's cool. Okay. But you got to get up and get off your ass and accomplish
Hmm.
something.
Absolutely. I think that's where we have that voice and we tend to minimize it, unfortunately. And then it comes back to that whole feeling like a victim, but you're not really doing anything to help yourself.
And how is Canada going to turn itself around? I'll put it to you.
We're hoping that there will be an election next year. So that will be a good starting point. But at least what I'm seeing and the conversations I'm having, people have had enough. And that leads me to my next question for you is the whole energy independence, because one of the biggest issues we're seeing is with all the resources we have, being a resource rich country, we are not taking advantage of it. And part of the reason, at least where I live, there's a lot of frustration around that because it's obviously affecting our economy where it should be thriving. So, again, there's a hope that with election, now we can't just expect a new leader to come in and fix everything. That would be naive. But at least we can start moving in the right direction. And this could still take years to clean up the mess that we're already in. But one of the things that you focused on also was the energy independence. So where do you see that shift in the US? And I think it would still apply to North America on a grander stage.
Yeah, in Canada, you have the oil
Hmm.
sands, you have natural gas liquids, you have natural gas
Hmm.
pipelines getting working its way to the western coast for export. And here, for example, um, natural gas is quoted as Henry
Hmm.
Hub. And Henry Hub is not a person, it's actually a
Hmm.
place. Okay. And it's where I think it's Cushing, Nebraska, where the price of natural gas is decided and quoted. And the price of natural gas is right now just about under
Hmm.
$2. Okay. It's gone from maybe $1.80 to 2.40 or 2.50 over the last 9 to 10 months. Used to be quite a bit higher. But if you go to Boston, okay, you will find that over 50% of New Englanders have heat their homes with natural
Hmm.
gas. Okay. And do you know where most of New England gets their natural gas from? The
Hmm.
Caribbean. It is shipped in by ships, chilled to 200 degrees Celsius in gigantic natural,
Okay.
those big circle ships. And it comes in from, I forget the country in the Caribbean. It supplies most of the natural gas used in Massachusetts. And it occurred to me that all of the politicians there, because they're very liberal democratic, they don't want pipelines in their
Hmm.
backyard. Okay. So rather than pay $5 to $6 for natural gas when it's trading at $1.90, okay, all they have to do is build a 400-mile pipeline to the Marcellus Shale Formation, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, New York. And underneath there is 1 century's worth of natural gas. They are sitting on a sea of natural gas that'll last 100
Hmm.
years. It's available for
Hmm.
$1.90. Meanwhile, Massachusetts pays $5 to $6. And during the winter, they pay
Hmm.
$6 to $7, just like Europe
Hmm.
does. Okay. And it's to me, Trump is right. Drill, baby, drill. Okay. We have the resources here. I'm an energy investor. I know a little
Hmm.
bit about energy. And I feel very comfortable that I'm sorry, my computer keeps making these
Okay.
noises. I apologize. My sense is we have the resources to be energy independent, but we don't have the political
Hmm.
will. Electric vehicles are piling up in the
Hmm.
lots. No one wants to buy them. Windmills and solar collectors, you can't have enough of
Hmm.
them because this country is about 60% natural
Yeah.
gas. You can't get rid of that in 1 year, 5 year,
Hmm.
or 10 years. It would take 50
Hmm.
years. Good
Yeah.
start, but it's not going to happen overnight like the progressive liberals hope it
Hmm.
will.
Hmm. And some of the alternative energy sources that you were touching on, they're not sustainable over the long term, at least as they are today, right? So we're continuing to invest and push on a solution that if you were a business person, you look at your venture, at some point you have to decide that it's time to pivot. I can't keep pushing money into this because I'm not getting any return.
Yes. I remember reading an article about a year ago, and I'm curious if it's changed, but you know those gigantic blades on the
Hmm.
windmills? They're literally what? I don't know, 200 feet long. Predominantly, they're made in
Hmm.
China. Do the
Hmm.
math, do the political math. Do we want to be dependent on a product that we don't even
Hmm.
make, that we have to import from China, who is not really our friend?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And then not only are you importing this product, is it really giving you the benefit that you think you were getting from it? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I do want to shift gears a little bit here and touch on something you touched on earlier as well, was the DEI piece. And you also whether it's someone else or you yourself refer to yourself as an equal opportunity critic, how do you tie the two together? Because there's a huge focus on DEI. You see it in organizations, you see it in institutions, you see it in society in general. There's this whole case to be made, you know, between equal opportunity and outcome. So, what are your thoughts around all of that, and why is this something that you focused on as well?
I think it comes back to
Mm-hmm.
entitlement. So I have a t-shirt that I wear when I go to the gym. I lift weights 4 or 5 days a week. And on the front of it, it says, "You're entitled." And on the back, it says, "To nothing." But I'm not a purist. I firmly believe you are entitled to air and
Mm-hmm.
water. If you're in a forest, maybe nuts
Mm-hmm.
and berries if the bear doesn't get them
Right.
first. Okay. But you're entitled to nothing because somebody else has to pay
Mm-hmm.
for it. Okay. When it comes to diversity, if I look at the current presidential administration and I ask myself, are the higher ups in the administration, were they chosen because of their superb abilities, or were they chosen because they check a
Mm-hmm.
box? They're gay, they're of a certain gender or genders, or they are politically connected. But are they the best person for the job? My sense is that if I look at the Secretary of Transportation, he was the mayor of a city in the Midwest with 100,000 people. He has no skills to be the Secretary of Transportation. He went to a good college, he got a good education, he's well spoken, but he has no skills to be the Secretary of Transportation. Yet he was put in there. He was a presidential failed
Mm-hmm.
candidate, but I firmly believe he was put in there because of his sexual orientation, not because of his skill set, that he was better than everyone
Mm-hmm.
else. Okay. We have a vice president that the latest headlines, are, is she black? Is she African American? She's actually Jamaican. I don't care what she is. The only thing I care about is her
Mm-hmm.
character and her
Mm-hmm.
abilities. To the best of what I've read and seen, she is a character, but she has no
Mm-hmm.
character. And she doesn't have any abilities that I have seen or witnessed. Okay. She was put in there because she filled the
Mm-hmm.
box. And I could go on and on with different parts of the administration. But my sense is that people are being put into jobs because of the boxes they check, not what they bring to the
Mm-hmm.
job. So the whole diversity, equity, and inclusion is, I'm going to include you because of the color of your skin or who you like to sleep with. And I really don't give a damn about that, what you do in your four walls when your door is closed and your drapes or your curtains are
Mm-hmm.
closed. I care about your skill set, your abilities, your experience, your
Mm-hmm.
intellect, and your character and your
Mm-hmm.
ethics. That's
Yeah.
what I care
Yeah.
about. So the whole DEI has nothing to do with any of that because they want equality of
Mm-hmm.
outcome. And you remember we spoke
Yes.
before that your outcome, how you will do in life, how you will succeed, is based on your decisions and your behavior. Okay. If I sit at home watching reruns of NCIS and playing video games, I don't deserve a Mercedes
Mm-hmm.
Benz. If you work your ass off, yeah, you could go buy a Mercedes Benz if you figured out that you could afford it. But I don't have the right to say, me
Mm-hmm.
too. No equal outcome. I have equal
Yes.
opportunity, but not equal
Mm-hmm.
outcome. I think that puts that question to
Yes.
bed. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I'm working on an essay myself here where it's going to be around merit versus metrics. And that's
Okay.
become This came to light for me, I'd say around a decade ago, if not more. And I was seeing that where there was a lot of checking the box exercises around filling numbers. And that's where the metrics come in. And I questioned the approach because I was intuitively, to me, it's all about merit. Now, the argument you often receive is you have to start somewhere. And I can buy that. But what I've seen is, unfortunately, when you start checking the boxes, you get people that are not suited for the role, or there's incompetence there. And then
I agree.
incompetency breeds incompetency. And then that starts spreading to the point where now it's, and one of the things is human psychology is, unfortunately, when incompetent people are put in these places of leadership, for example, they're unlikely to hire people that might challenge them because that may bring their intelligence or incompetency to the forefront. So they're likely to hire people similar to themselves, and that's how it spreads, right? So that's my,
Or yes
yeah,
men.
that's
Yes.
my view on it, and it has become an issue. And like I said, I'm exploring that and wanting to write about it more. But I agree with you. However, there is that argument that I try to think about often is, okay, you have to start somewhere to get representation. I struggle with that still because if everyone has equal opportunity and we're focusing on merit, then representation should not matter.
No, you're exactly right. The only reason somebody should get a job is because their skill set is a match for the requirements of the job. They don't get it because how tall they are, how much they weigh, what gender they are, what religion they are, or the color of their
Mm-hmm.
skin. Tell me about their character and their abilities and their relevant experience, and I will make a decision whether or not trustworthiness is in
Mm-hmm.
there too, whether or not they are suitable for the
Mm-hmm.
job. Okay. It has nothing to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and everyone getting together and singing kumbaya around
Mm-hmm.
the fire.
Mm-hmm. And I think, to your point, where do you stop, right? Like, how many items can you have in that box? Because to me, it seems like it keeps growing too,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that becomes an issue. So I guess one of the questions that people, and no offense to you, like I could probably get the same thing, is, you guys are just being dinosaurs. You need to get with the times. What would your response be to that? Hey, you're just an old man. You're bitter. You just don't know what's going on. Reality is different. How would you respond to that?
If reality is spending 8 hours a day looking at your phone on social media and seeing how many friends you have on wherever it is and putting videos of what you're eating for lunch on TikTok so that the Chinese Communist Party can see what your diet is, have at it. Me, I have been blessed to have wonderful mentors in my
Mm-hmm.
life. Among them, Jim Rohn, Brian Tracy, Dan Kennedy, Lee Miltier, Jay Abraham, and some others. And what they taught me is number one, if you see everyone doing this, go the other way because that's probably the wrong
Mm-hmm.
thing. Okay. And if you don't have a role model specifically, look what they're all doing and do something
Mm-hmm.
else. That has proven to be probably the best advice that I've ever gotten. Because I remember when I started off as a
Mm-hmm.
stockbroker with E.F. Hutton on Wall Street back in 1983, I would watch what all the other rookies were doing, and I would do the same thing. I was stupid as the day is
Mm-hmm.
long. But when I started to read and learn and do something differently, that's when I started to excel and my career took off. Okay. But just because something is old doesn't mean it's
Mm-hmm.
bad. Okay. When I see all these millennials and the habits that they have, I'll have no part of
Mm-hmm.
it. Thank you very
Mm-hmm.
much. I am productive 14 hours a day. I would say they're probably productive a fraction of
Hmm.
that because they don't put down their
Hmm.
phones. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's being inundated with information and stimulation, right? And I feel like there's a lot more distraction. And you've touched on some of the ways we.
Yeah. And everyone thinks that they have to respond immediately. For Ken, if you have a brain fart and you send me a text on whatever, I have no obligation to immediately stop what I'm doing, read it, and
Hmm.
respond. I may respond in a couple hours or a couple days or
Hmm.
never. That's my right and my choice. But the younger generation, those thumbs are going 40 miles an hour all day long because every time it beeps or dings or rings, they stop what they're doing and they
Hmm.
respond. That's basically a prescription for no
Hmm.
productivity.
Hmm.
So I have a huge problem
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah. No, I appreciate.
When is it going to change? That's a good
Yeah.
question.
No, I appreciate that. And so we've focused a lot throughout this conversation on all the issues. And where we started the discussion was around the polarization and the difference of opinions and how we cannot find common ground. How do you break that? So maybe if we were to end this conversation in a positive light and talk about what we need to do differently. How do we get on the same page and start talking about the issues that are at the forefront rather than focusing on some of the menial things that you've also touched on in this discussion, but even in your book, where we're so distracted by these little things, whether, like you said earlier, too, is what gender are the bathrooms, how many do we have, all of this, and actually focused on the issues and started to find common ground. Where do we start that and how do we get to that place?
I I think the beginning of it. Let me ask you a question. Did you ever take civics in high school?
No.
Okay. I had to take civics back in the 1970s in New York City at public school. And civics basically taught you how to behave in
Hmm.
society. And it taught you a bit about government
Hmm.
also. But today, I don't see people being civil to each
Hmm.
other. As I wrote in a book, oftentimes in the House of Representatives, I'll hear something like, and I now yield to that ass from North Carolina.
Hmm.
Okay. There is no respect. Okay. Just like when we were talking about Ben Shapiro talking to a college kid, instead of them coming back with facts, there were personal attacks. If we could rein in the personal attacks and have civil discussions, yes, we have disagreements. People, especially the size of your country or mine, will always have disagreements. They have, okay, so to sum it up, we basically need a respectful conversation,
Hmm.
dialogue where we actually allow each other to have their say, their point of view
Hmm.
without attacking them personally. Okay. If I'm a conservative and I think we should have a robust military to defend the peace, and you're a liberal who says that the Defense Department should be shut down,
Hmm.
there's a lot of room there for some intelligent discussion
Right.
without shouting and yelling. So if we could speak with each other respectfully, and that's a big ask, I
Yeah.
understand that. But if we could speak to each other respectfully and arrive at a solution that both of us can live with, I think your country and my country will move forward very well.
Hmm.
But in the absence of that, I'm very worried about our countries.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think you also touched on this in your book is the foundation on which the United States and perhaps later on Canada were built on is gone awry. And I think that's where a lot of the issues are coming to the forefront. Another thing I've seen in the therapeutic side as a therapist is people need to heal. themselves. There's a lot of trauma or unprocessed emotions that come forward when someone disagrees with you or points out something constructive that you can focus on. Because you haven't done that healing within yourself, you get triggered and you take it personally, as opposed to looking at it as an opportunity not only to learn but find your blind spots. And that, the more you become aware of, it's putting your house in order first before you start trying to fix other.
Yeah. And you have a right to disagree. That's fine. Because if everyone had the same opinion on the planet, I think the world would be really boring.
Yeah, I agree with you. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I appreciate the work you're doing and some of the stuff you're bringing to the forefront and highlighting.
Thank you.
It's very important, and I'm really grateful and appreciative of this opportunity to talk with you, learn more about your, and learn your insights as well, because that's important. That gives people like myself an opportunity to just see things in a different light. And I'm very much appreciative of that. For listeners that perhaps want to learn more about your work, find your book, maybe even get in touch with you, what are some ways they can do that?
The best way, and you're right, before we mentioned it, I am the equal opportunity critic.
Mhm.
And I know that's a mouthful, so we shortened it. So you could find me on the web at eocritic.com, short for equal opportunity critic. So eocritic.com. There are a lot of links to my press room there. There's blogs, there's vlogs, there's a link to Amazon to my book, and you could sign up for my free twice a month newsletter, which gives you an update on certain hot points going on in the US and in the world. Again, it's eocritic.com. Knock yourself out.
All right. I'll put that in the show notes. But Roger, thank you so much for this opportunity and this conversation today.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Have a great day.
You as well.
Okay.